Hi, I'm Annie Botticelli, and this is the Storyteller Forecast for Scorpio for May 2016. Go to my website, anniehelpsyou.com, where you can see what's new on my blog, and while you're there, sign up for my free email newsletter and become part of my VIP crew. I just added a new interview series that I'm starting to connect with really cool people doing amazing things in the world and bringing interesting insights to you through that, but only if you're on my list. So, what is going on in May? May is this very interesting time of a massive amount of trines. There's some really surprising, sweet opportunities amidst this wall of retrograde, as I described it last month. If you haven't already listened to my report in March talking about the eclipses are still active and telling a story. So I think it's good for you to check back with that. If you haven't listened to April, definitely check back with that because we talked more about Mars retrograde, which started April 17th, runs through June 29th, but the shadow periods stretched from February all the way out into August. So this is a long transit, and I also did a separate blog and video on Mars retrograde that I highly recommend you watch because Mars is a co-ruler for Scorpio. So everyone is affected by this transit, and there are lots of do's and don'ts that are very specific. And even though everyone's affected by it, Scorpios and Aries are more affected by it because there's a rulership there for your sign. And I'm not going to cover all of that here, so you have to make sure to supplement that information by watching that video as well. Also watch my Mercury retrograde video because I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of that, but yet April 28th through May 22nd, we have Mercury retrograde as well. But what I want to focus on now is this massive amount of coherence, this wonderful series of trines. Trines are the most favorable aspect in astrology. They're 120-degree configurations that are made between planets, and this is very sacred geometrically. It's a sacred geometry. It is basically what it's very sacred geometrically strong. That's what I was going to say, but it doesn't make any sense. But you see where I'm going with this. A trine is a powerful alignment, a mathematical alignment that positively shifts and brings opportunities when this configuration occurs. And there are several of them throughout the month, all aspecting different planets with signs, the energy in different signs, and it's just very, very, very powerful. Trines bring opportunities. Trines bring things to fruition. Trines bring goodies that you either didn't have to do anything to get, or goodies from things that you have already done. So if you spent the pre-retrograde period making your launches, and you spent the post or the retrograde period doing your inner work, you may be having some massive gifts that start to come in May, even though this giant wall of retrograde is still present. When I think of the giant wall of retrograde, I think about movies, and I'm thinking of one in particular. It's a cartoon. It's a Japanese anime film. It's one of my favorite movies. It's called Ponyo. And Ponyo is, anyway, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but in the movie, there's this giant wall of water, and all the ships are these little tiny things underneath this huge wall of water. And that's what the retrogrades feel like to me now, with Mars and Mercury being retrograde. It's like this giant wall of retrograde that you can't really do that much with. But at the same time, you can do a lot with it, but it's retrograde, so you have to do retrograde things with it. That's what I wanted to get at. But these trines, along with Jupiter going direct in May, are bringing possible forward movement in the midst of this retrograde. So even though it's a wall of retrograde, Jupiter is actually a bigger, more influential planet compared to Mercury and Mars. So there are Mercury and Mars retrograde things to take into consideration as these blessings come in, which I'll get into. But there's still a strong chance that some forward movement can occur even in the midst of all this retrograde. So let's talk more about that. Jupiter is for early degree Scorpio placements. Early degree Scorpio placements are essentially the October born Scorpios and the first couple of days of November, like up through November 2nd. or the first 10 degrees of the sign. So from 0 degrees to 9 degrees of Scorpio if you're watching for your ascendant. So early placements, you have had Jupiter in the 11th house. The rest of the Scorpio placements have had Jupiter still in the 10th house. And that was facilitated by Jupiter going retrograde. So it was about to move forward for more of you, and then it went backwards. So you might have noticed for the early placements, things involving groups, teams, organization, internet projects, humanitarian efforts, working with communities, building communities, anything having to do with groups, bridge building, communities, things like that, humanitarian things. You may have had projects that were moving along having to do with one or more of those. The middle to later degree placements, so most of the November born Scorpios, you might have had career, work, life purpose things going on that seemed like you were brewing to move forward. And then when Jupiter went retrograde in the beginning of January, everything just seemed to stop. It's like, oh, where's the luck, the benevolence, the expansion, all of that? It's still there, but it's harder to see because it's working on a deeper level, working on an inner level. It's almost like testing support beams. So like if you're going to knock out a wall in a house, you've got to test to make sure that the beams that are left when you knock it out, that the house is going to stay up, you know? And that's what Jupiter in its forward movement is like. It's like stretching, expanding, and then seeing how much stress it can put on the foundation that you have built. Then when it goes retrograde, it has the information it needs to say, oh, actually you can't expand that much further without a little bit of work here, a little bit of work here, a little bit of work here. And then, so from January, February, March, April into May, Jupiter was spending this time solidifying the foundation for the expansion that is to come starting in May. So that's the story of what's happening. So once it goes direct, it's like waking this. Again, I think of a movie. This one is called Tinkerbell and the Never Beast. So I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. It's a really great movie too. But it's like this Never Beast that's been asleep for thousands of years. You know, he starts to wake up. And that's what I think about with Jupiter, because it turns out that the Never Beast is quite positive and benevolent, just like Jupiter is. So that's what's happening in May. So even with this wall of retrograde, blessings, opportunities, like getting back on track with the things that seem to have been slipping or slipped, you start to get that expansion going again. If opportunities come to you in the month of May, while these trines and Jupiter is waking up and you still have Mercury and Mars retrograde, what do? There's a huge difference between initiating and going out to get something or pushing something out into the world. Those activities are not indicated even in May with all these blessings. What is indicated is to watch blessings as they come in and then decide what to do with them. This energy is very akin to a spider. And I think Scorpio energy really understands this. I'm using this as an example in some of the horoscopes to explain the nature of this energy. But Scorpio energy really gets this, like weaving this web in the darkness so that you catch the food that comes to you. And then you don't have to do that much else because you do this work like in the inner and the dark and in the backdrop. And then the rest of it works for you. And that's what this is like. It's like you spent before the retrograde times setting a foundation when Jupiter was direct, maybe in February and March before Mercury and Mars went retrograde. You spent time building this web. Now in May, you kick back and you see what it catches. When it catches something, then you can be discerning as to say, oh yeah, actually I don't want that. I'm not going to eat that, you know? But one thing to consider, and this is how we combine the blessings that are coming in, the understanding of the blessings coming in from those transits with the nature of the retrograde, is that even if something comes to you as an opportunity, you probably don't have the full story yet. You don't have, either someone is purposely keeping it from you, they're being deceptive, or you just haven't gotten up to that part in the negotiations where all of the information comes out, or you haven't asked the right questions. So if you can avoid signing anything until at least after June 8th, and if you can do it further, like into July, that would be even better if it's something for a long-term thing. If it's for a short-term thing that has a quick turnover, then that might be okay, more okay than the long-term thing. But you definitely don't want to sign it if you can help it while Mercury's in retrograde, because unless it's a short-term contract, like you're going to, you're waiting to find housing and then housing comes to you and it's a 6-month lease. That's okay. You want to be meticulous with your contract, but Mercury rules short-term things. So if you're signing about something short-term, yeah, there might be something that you miss because of the retrograde, but at least it rules short-term. Where you get into trouble is where you think it's going to be long-term. You're expecting, putting all your eggs in one basket, that it's going to be long-term, but the retrograde's saying, yeah, it's actually going to be short-term. So, you can monitor this depending on what's appropriate for your situation, but try to ask questions and move along in your talks in a way that you don't lose the opportunity, but in a way that you draw out the information that is hidden still by these retrogrades. So we've got Jupiter waking up career, work, and life purpose for most of you. We've got Jupiter expanding the 11th house, the teams, groups, organizations, communities, etc. In the short term, there's a massive congregation of quicker moving planets in the 6th house. Now, some of you earlier degree placements, October-born Scorpios, will have focus in the 7th house on partnerships, relationships, clients, one-on-one interactions. We'll get very busy for that. And that's coming for the rest of you Scorpios, in the coming weeks after May. That will start to line up for the rest of the Scorpios too. But all Scorpios will have short-term energy in the 6th house. And the 6th house has to do with your daily routine. It has to do with your diet and your health and your exercise and pets and things that you do every day. Medical diagnostics are also there because everything under the heading of health, so alternative health, mainstream healing, medical diagnostics, labs, diet, health regimen, yoga, meditation, all those things. And the quality of your daily work experience. So if you work from home or if you have an office that you go into, the quality of the experience and the type of experience that you have every day, that's in the 6th house. So there's a lot of busyness and activity there for all Scorpios. There's long-term influence. Okay, so let's separate this out now. If you look at a horoscope chart, which is essentially a picture of the sky, where all the planets are in their configuration, you are seeing the planets like the sun, like the moon, like Mercury, like Venus, that move very quickly. So every month, they're in a different place, and that's great fodder for horoscopes. It's like, oh, what's new now? What's new is the personal planets moved into this house, and now there's a different focus for you, But there's long-term planets that take a long time to move, and those are just kind of in the same place for an extended period of time. So there's a lot of that energy, of long-term energy, in the 5th house. And all Scorpios are having this story in the 5th house. The middle to later degree placements, so the November born after about November 2nd, like November 3rd on, are having Uranus, the great jolter, the bringer of surprises, the bringer of upsets or new information or excitements, in your 5th house. And the 5th house has to do with the house of children, creativity, conception, the whole process from true love, romance, falling in love, conceiving a child, bringing a child out into the world. And that process for other creative ventures as well. The inspiration of an idea of a creative project, the follow through and the bringing out into the world of the creative project. So it doesn't matter if a baby is actually involved. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. But that whole process has to do with the 5th house. So that is having a Uranus type of energy, which is just like erratic, and it's sizzling in this case because Uranus is in Aries. It's like electric, it's like you have your finger stuck in an electric socket, and so your creativity circuits are being overloaded, and you might have had a lot of inspiration from this, and you might have had a lot of jostles and upsets from it in this area of your life. The earlier degree placements have Neptune, the South Node, and Chiron, which is an asteroid called the Wounded Healer, in that fifth house. So the South Node has to do with karma and has to do with your gifts and if you're using them wisely or if you're using them at all and how you're bringing them into the world or not. Neptune has to do with addictions. It has to do with the dissolving away of things. Sometimes the dissolving comes from not leaving addictions behind and then other things are leaving. Or it has to do with people having addictions around you. Or it has to do with the process of, it's like the opposite of addiction. It's the remembering that your happiness comes from inside of you and is not determined by people, places, or things. And you place your happiness and joy inside of you with your connection with the divine. That you're not chasing things outside of you for your happiness. You're placing that in yourself, in your connection with the divine. That's the story of Neptune. There's like a range of potential expression. The lowest vibration is this addiction, looking for things in other things, not finding it, things dissolving away. Then the higher vibration of that is turning to God, turning to spirit, turning to the universe, whatever you call that benevolent source, to say, hey, actually, you're what I'm looking for, and I'm going to find you through communing with you and not losing myself in the addiction. So there's this story about addictions and placing happiness in things that are not solid. And that's going on. And then the karma, also karmic relationships, karmic experiences involving children and conception and things like that, and creativity and creative projects. And then Chiron has to do with that place where you feel most wounded. So that place where you feel most like a victim, that's where Chiron is. It's like you're dipped into the waters of eternality except by your heel. And that's the story of Achilles, this heel. And then of course he died because he had an arrow shot to his heel and that was his weakness. So this Chiron talks about that spot in you that's most vulnerable and bringing that up for healing. So even these things that sound like, oh, that's heavy, I don't really want to deal with that, they're going on and they're not happening to torture you. They're happening to give you the opportunity to get to the higher vibration. When you see, when you know, when you remember, when you believe that we came in as conscious souls, knowing what we were doing, then there's no blame assigned to the things that happened in our childhood or our lives because we have an imprint within us that projected that out into the holographic reality and brought it to us as an experience. So you have a huge opportunity to see where you've been acting like a victim, thereby creating more tyrants to come and show you, hey, you need to turn this around. So all of that's going on at the same time while we have Mars retrograde and Mercury retrograde. And so I highly recommend that in order to really get the best picture of May, watch the March report about eclipses where I talked about eclipses. Watch the April report where I went more into Mars retrograde and some other things. Watch my Mars retrograde video and read the blog on my website, anniehelpsyou.com, to really see what the deal is with that. Because Mars rules anger and frustration and action. And it's going backwards and it can bring frustration. And you want to learn how to use that energy and prevent the frustration and get to have a relaxing, comfortably productive Mars retrograde instead of a frustrated, crazy thing of an experience. An example, when I went to go, I have Mars retrograde on my mind. I'm acutely aware of, as I'm recording this, Mars is not retrograde yet, but it's coming closer and I'm feeling it. I have Aries Rising, so I'm very affected by it. I went to record this video and I have a short window of time to do it where there's kind of quietness where I can do this. And my neighbor had Prince blasting so loud. And I love it. I wouldn't even care if I weren't trying to record. But instead of being like, oh my gosh, I have this wall window and I can't, blah, whatever, and getting into that whole whatever, I just decided, okay, what's going to happen is not going to happen. I'm going to do something else. If I fit it in, I fit it in. But if I wasn't really aware of the nature of Mars retrograde, I probably would have used my Aries force to just get angry. about it, you know, and have a totally different quality of experience. So understanding the nature of these transits can help you change the nature of your experience from something really stressful and frustrating to something that's just like the beach vibe, which is what I call the motto for April and into May and June when Mars is retrograde. So check out all those things. Check out the Mercury retrograde video. If you want some personal assistance, go to my website. Check out my blogs, anniehelpsyou.com. Check out my resources that I've created to help you on your journey, including my personal coaching. And definitely sign up for my free email newsletter where you will get a write-up of the month coming as well as other goodies. And I hope you have a wonderful month, and I'll see you next month. Bye.